Alright, welcome back to the channel. Today we'll have a look at how to paint a Space Marine Apothecary. This video will cover everything you need to get this guy on the tabletop. All the paints and tools will be listed below in the description, so let's get into it. Starting from a base of black, I'll be using the airbrush to establish the main volumes within the armour. I'll be using Mechanicus Grey, Fenrisian Grey and Titanium White. This will give the armour a cold feel and help complement with the warmer colours we're adding later. You can see how I'm positioning the model relative to the airbrush. This will help control the spray and target the areas where I want. I'm specifically focusing on the head, the shoulders, the top of the backpack, down the legs. I'm doing this to help emphasize the shape of the volumes and to create an almost non-metallic reflective look to the white armor. I should mention I'm using a dual action airbrush here, so I have control over the air and paint. So you can see I'm working around using short, quick bursts of paint, but always keeping the air on. Positioning the model so I'm hitting the areas that I want and avoiding the areas that I don't. I'm also remembering to put in the bounce lights and the reflections underneath the hands and the arms, just so they're not in pure shadow. This is where we get to after the first pass, and we come back again with the Mechanicus standard grey, and we emphasize the areas that we've already highlighted. This just helps to build more saturation within the colour, create smoother transitions between the darker values and the lighter values, and it makes it easier to apply the Fenrisian Grey over the top. I just want to quickly mention the consistency of the paint in the airbrush. You can see it's very thin. It's thinned with a combination of thinner, water and paint. Everyone's combination is different. I use about 2 or 3 drops of thinner and water to paint. Now coming back in with the mix of the Mechanicus standard grey and the Fenrisian Grey to start building up those highlights. You can see after one pass it actually makes quite a big difference. Just continuing to work around the model, same as before, targeting the same areas and emphasizing those highlights, helping to make the volumes more readable. I'll be doing a more in-depth video on airbrushing in the near future, where I'll be covering paint consistency, techniques, application, assembly, maintenance, and everything in between. So when it comes to the head, I really want to emphasize the direction that the light's coming from. This allows me to create a specular highlight and really draw attention into this area. Again, you can see I'm catching the underside of the plates because the bounce light will be hitting these areas. So we're coming in with the pure Fenrisian Grey now, and again just repeating the process, emphasizing those highlights, drawing more attention to the shape of the volume, and staying consistent with our light direction. Again, don't forget to catch those areas of bounce light. It's very important to add those in, as it helps to create more shape and structure within the model. And don't worry about all these areas of overspray, we'll be coming back in and cleaning those up after. You could mask them off if you want, but I find it easier just to clean up everything at the end. So now we're coming back in with our mix of Titanium White and Fenrisian Grey. Again, we're focusing in on the areas we've already highlighted and bringing up those values. The reason why I don't use pure white is because I want to save that for the highlights at the end. Using pure white on the edge highlights helps to create more definition and more shape within the model. If I used white now, I would have nothing to be able to highlight those areas with or to create those sharp edges. So if you make any mistakes while you're airbrushing, you can quickly fix these by softening out the transitions. Just wait for the paint to dry, come back in and apply a couple of layers either side to get rid of any spider webbing, coffee staining or any mistakes. Airbrushing small models may seem daunting at first, but this is a great tool to practice with. It can greatly improve your speed when it comes to army painting and really help with smoothing out transitions on larger models. And just one more time, don't forget about those bounce lights and reflections underneath. They really do help to sell this effect. Once I was happy with the finish on the armour panels, I apply gloss varnish all over. I'll be using gloss Nuln Oil to apply a wash and create separation. The reason why we're using a gloss varnish in combination with a gloss wash is because it lowers the surface tension on the miniature. So whenever you apply the wash, it goes into the recesses and doesn't sit on the flat surfaces. So we're taking advantage of the capillary action. Whenever we touch the brush to the model, the paint almost flows into the recesses without us having to do too much work. In all honesty, it's practically cheating. So we're just applying this all over the Mini, well not all over the Mini, into all of the recesses of the Mini, avoiding those smooth, flat panels where we spent all that time airbrushing. Now we've finished the panel lining, I come back in and I give the model a spray of matte varnish. This helps to remove that shine and matte everything down. I've also taken some time to coat everything in Mars Black, ready for the next step. So as we're painting this guy as an ultramarine, I'm taking some Prussian blue and thinning it down on the palette, essentially creating a filter layer over the black and white value sketch of the shoulder pad. I'm applying a very thin layer of paint all over the top and avoiding any pooling at any part of the model. If you want to be part of any other chapter, just do this process but with your appropriate chapter color. Following exactly the same process for the marine on the ground, again applying a thin filter layer over the top of the value sketch. Now we want to get on to doing some weathering to make our apothecary look like he's been on the battlefield for a while. He's been in the fight and now he's going around finding his dead brothers. So we're taking some blister foam, tearing it up and creating some interesting edges that we'll be using to dab on the burnt Sienna Umber to the model. So I'm using a pair of tweezers to hold it here because I'm not that dexterous, and I'm just testing it out on my thumb first and applying it to the model. You don't want too much paint coming off your blister foam, as you want the scratches and chips to be of the appropriate size for the miniature. Try and target the areas where you're most likely to have damage, around the feet, the leg panels, edges of the armour. You know, anywhere where he may have been shot, damaged, been in a fight. You can get quite creative with this and play around with it as much as you want. You may find as you go through the model you need to replace your piece of blister. It's always worth keeping these. If you ever get them in any models, don't throw them out. You never know when they might come in handy. And with our guy on the ground, we're going super heavy with the weathering here. He's obviously had the worst of it. Now we just want to clean some of this up, add in a bit more texture in places, and maybe create some lines and scratches in the armor. So we're coming back in with quite a small brush. Again, focusing on those edges and places where you're likely to see the damage. And then just adding in a few extra dabs and scratches here and there over the armor, just to help build the narrative and the story. Less is generally more when it comes to weathering. Obviously use your best judgment and try to position the weathering in the most realistic places. Play around with the effects, the size of your chips, the scratches, and have some fun with it. Now we're going to start building our value sketch for the red tabard or apron that he's wearing. We're using a combination of red ochre, Mars black and titanium white to start our value sketch. Starting with a mix of Mars black and red ochre, we'll be using this to cover all of the tabard or apron. We're going to take some white and add that to the mix, and we're going to start building our value sketch. Our value sketch is basically going to be the foundation for the red that we'll be applying over the top. Red's quite a transparent color, so it benefits greatly from having a larger value range underneath rather than having to add white or other colors to it to highlight it afterwards. So you'll see I'm just picking areas where the light would catch, where there's folds in the material. And I really want to focus on that dominant fold in the middle of the chest, really increasing the value in that area and creating a harsh or sharp transition between the brightest point and the darkest point underneath. Now be careful whenever you're painting this, you don't want to get any of this onto the white armor that you did previously because it could stain and it becomes harder to fix. But again, we're just catching the folds in the lower part of the tabard. Adding more white to our mix. Again, we're going to bring up these values even further and create more contrast. Whenever you're doing this, it doesn't have to be super smooth either. It just has to be reasonably smooth. You're doing this with layers. We're not spending time glazing or really spending much time blending the colors together. So it's step by step, build up those transitions. You can spend a wee bit of extra time to introduce some texture like I'm doing here. Once you're finished creating your value sketch, you should have something that looks like this. And now we're taking some primary red, we're thinning that down to a glaze consistency, as you can see, exactly the same way we did with the blue, just applying that all over the tabard. When you're doing this, just make sure you're covering only the tabard. Avoid getting any of it on the white armor. This step will help smooth out those transitions between your dark values and your light values. This will take a few passes in order to build up that saturation. So maybe 2, 3, 4 passes. It's very quick though, and they all dry very fast due to the consistency of the paint. And you can already see how saturated that red is now that we spent the time doing that value sketch underneath. Now let's do some metallics. Taking some metal color, dark aluminum or aluminium actually, apply this all over the areas that you want to be silver. I really rate these paints. I think they are a great buy. I never find that I have to do multiple passes with them. They always seem to apply brilliantly with just one coat. So apply this all over the areas that you want to be silver, and then we'll be coming back in to do a wash later on. So exactly the same with the gold. This time we're using Viking gold from Scale Color. Really good gold. Really good coverage as well. So again, just coat this all over the gold areas, and then we'll be coming back in for a wash. So when it comes to washing these, I'm just going to create my own. So I'm taking some Mars Black, thinning it down to glaze consistency, and then applying this over. You can use Nuln Oil or any other wash that you want. I just find this to be the easiest way to do it because I have it on my palette and I don't have to worry about spilling it. I also want to show that there's no real dependency on product or company when it comes to painting. You can create a lot of these things yourself, so do experiment with your paints, thinning them down and using them for multiple different purposes. So the reason we apply a wash is to create separation within the components, to dull the colour down and to create that battle-worn look. And exactly the same with the gold. We're taking our burnt Sienna Umber, thinning that down and applying it over the top. Again, you can use Agrax Earth Shade or any other brown wash that you have for this. So I'm just basing all of my leathers in Mars Black, getting them ready for the next step. I'm also taking a second to go and clean up that gun casing so it's nice and crisp. Taking a mix of Mars Black and Titanium White, I begin to highlight the leathers, letting the brush dance along the edge to create some texture and interest within these areas. We want to continue to build that narrative that our apothecary has been on the battlefield and is now going around and collecting the gene seed from his fallen brothers. Again, none of this has to be perfect because we're making it look like he's been through a war and anything that he has on his body is going to be damaged in the process. And it's the same with the holsters. We'll be creating a lot of texture and interest in these areas with stippling and hashing, focusing our attention on places that receive the most wear and tear. Adding some more Titanium White to our mix, we start to build up those highlights and create more texture using stippling and hashing. Again, always focusing on where the most wear and tear would occur, around the edges, where the gun rests, and on the flap. So now you can see what we've got. Just highlight this one more time. If you're feeling fancy, you can add in a couple of lines, just makes it that wee bit more exciting. Then to finish it off, we'll be taking a glaze of Mars Black over the top. This just helps to tie everything together, helps to harmonize the colors and create smoother transitions. For the skull, I'm starting off with a mix of buff and black to set up a base layer. Buff's essentially just a bone color, a dark bone color, so you can use anything that is similar. Come back in with a wash of our burnt sienna umber just to create some contrast and add some tonal variation. And then we're going to highlight this with a mix of our buff and titanium white,
using stippling and various other techniques to create texture within the bone, focusing on the main areas around the orbital bones and the forehead. After that, just clean up the leathers, same as you did before, and then it's on to the purity seals. Using the same combination of colours, we're starting off with our buff and black mix, just to lay down the foundation. Another wash of burnt sienna umber, just to create some contrast and tonal variation. Then coming back in with a highlight of buff, just to start creating some contrast and define each of the purity seals. Then we just add a wee bit of white to bring up the edges. Now, depending on how thick you apply your paint whenever you're doing this, can create more contrast and more texture. You can use this to create lines or to create scratches or damage within any of these parts of the models. So get creative and play around with the finish. Paint the purity seals, I'm just coming in with straight primary red and applying that around the wax seal. Now let's get these monitors done. So starting from Sap Green, we're going to lay down our foundation. Just a couple of thin layers to build up that colour. Now when it comes to highlighting green, I prefer to add yellow. Mixing a primary colour into green helps to improve the saturation and the vibrancy of the colour. So I'll be using this to start building up my highlights in the screens, working in a transition of dark to light. Oops, forgot to do this bit earlier. Adding in more intense yellow to help boost the vibrancy and the value of the colour. Now finally, to make these monitors a bit more interesting, we're going to add a heartbeat sensor here. So I'm taking some titanium white, drawing a short line, then dragging it down and creating a diagonal that goes from the bottom all the way to the top. And then back down to the center line and finishing that off. It takes a wee bit of practice to get these right. If you do make any mistakes, just go back, start from a black base and build up your color again. You can see I made a wee mistake here, so I'm just coming back in with some of our Sap Green just to help hide that. Now we're onto the vials. Now we want these to look like there's a liquid inside, so we're starting off with some Sap Green and we're mapping out where the liquid would be. It's always important to remember how these are positioned and how the liquid would sit within the canister or the vial. To highlight this, we're adding intense yellow into the Sap Green, same as you did for the computer monitors on the wrist. And when you're highlighting these liquids, you're thinking about how the light is coming in and interacting with it. So generally the highlights tend to form around the meniscus or where the water level is. Hopefully you're able to see that I'm focusing my highlights towards that water level or where the meniscus is within the vial. This just helps to create a more realistic effect. Now as it comes to start building up your final highlights, you want to potentially think about adding in some dots or some bubbles almost to this to start giving the impression that maybe there's some kind of gas within it as well. But again, play around with these things, experiment and see what works. It's always good to push yourself and try new things. Onto the lights, we'll just be coating these with intense yellow just to give the indication that there's a yellow light behind each of them. And do the same for the small one on the head. Now let's paint the eye lenses, starting with a mix of primary red and Mars black. Apply an even coat all over the eye. And same for the guy on the base. Come back in with the second pass, just to really establish that base and lay a good foundation. Adding more primary red to the mix, start to establish the highlight pattern. This is the underside of the lens and towards the inner corner. Again, this one takes some practice, so if you have to do it a couple of times, that is all well and good. Next, I'm just creating my mix for my highlights. So I've got primary red and intense yellow to create a bit of an orange. But I'm taking primary red here and repeating the highlight process that we followed in the last step. It's the lower edge and the inner corner are the most important parts. And you're covering less area each time you highlight. Now taking our primary red and intense yellow mix, apply that over your previous highlight, being sure to leave some of the red exposed. Now we add some titanium white to the mix, just to increase the value of these colours. This may appear to be quite a drastic highlight, but we'll only be applying it to the inner corner of the eye, and we want that to be the most intense part of the lens. Now, last but not least, to give this lens effect, we want to come in with some pure titanium white. This is the hard part. You need to do a dot in the top corner of the eye. You can see I tested out in my thumb, just to ensure that the paint's flowing properly before I try to apply it to the model. To paint the glass magnifiers in front of his face, I'll be starting with a base of Prussian blue. We'll be highlighting this up quite a bit with titanium white, so we just need a good even base coat here over each of the lenses and on the back side. Now we're going to mix in our titanium white and really increase the value here. When we're doing this, we're creating a different reflection pattern than we did for the lenses, just so there's some variation in the textures and the materials on the model. So I'll be focusing my highlight towards the top corner rather than the bottom corner. And again, we're just adding more titanium white, reinforcing that previous highlight and covering less area than we did previously. So So now we apply a highlight of pure titanium white into the top corner of each lens. And finally, we're taking a glaze of our Prussian blue and coating this all over the lens. Just add some saturation back in. Finishing this off with a dot of white in each corner of the magnifying lenses. Now we're going to do some blue lenses, very similar to how we did the red, starting off coating the whole thing in Prussian blue over the black. Taking a mix of titanium white and Prussian blue, we're going to start highlighting in the lower left side as we look at the model. Adding more titanium white, we just further reinforce that highlight. And with this color, I'm going to do the dot in the top left hand or the top right hand corner as well. Now we're nearly done with this, so we just have to paint the base and the gene seed gland thing in his hand. Starting off with our burnt sienna umber, we're going to coat the entire base. Now we're coming in with a quick dry brush of XV88. Don't worry if you get any of the XV88 over the feet, the marine on the ground, or the tabard. This will just help to tie the model into the base. Now taking some pure XV88, use that to create some texture and definition within the rock formations on the base. Just to create some separation between the aquila and the rest of the base, we're going to be coating this in a mix of Mars black and titanium white. We'll be adding more titanium white to create some highlights within the aquila as well. Last but not least, we got to paint this gland. Starting off with some Bugman's Glow, applying that all over the main gland and the tentacle things that come off it. Next, taking glaze of our primary red and applying this all over the gland, ensuring that it gets into the recesses and tints the Bugman's Glow. Applying another coat of this red wash to increase the colour intensity. Creating a mix of Bugman's Glow and white with a very small amount of primary red just to tint the colour, start highlighting up the gland. And with those final few highlights, this model is ready for tabletop. We'll be covering how to elevate this and take it to the next level in a future video. So be sure to subscribe to get notified when that goes live.
Hopefully you found that useful. If you have any comments, questions or suggestions for future videos, please drop them below in the comments. And I stream a couple of days a week on Twitch if you want to come by and hang out. We also have a Discord where you can come along, get involved with the community and share some of your work with us. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you at the next one.
Don't forget to like and subscribe.